what I'm going to be talking about here this morning. That happiness is not any endpoint. Do you notice that the word happiness is a noun? However, the descriptors for happiness are things like that she just sang. Finding something, tying your shoes, learning to whistle, whistling, loving, playing. They're all verbs or gerund forms of the verb. It's a process. Happiness is a process. Happiness is not a particular endpoint that we are seeking in life. And yet a lot of us seem to think that there are the endpoints that, like finding the right person at the right place, having the right home, having the best job, living in the right town, or whatever it is. It's kind of like a goal, an endpoint. Goals are wonderful, but you do all the living in the process of getting to the goal. And that's the way happiness is. I saw a cartoon that I like very much. This is a Peanuts cartoon. And, Charles Schulz, and he died a while back, but this is one of the old cartoons of Lucy and Charlie Brown. And Lucy and Charlie Brown are talking, and Lucy is talking to Charlie Brown, and in the background, you can see Snoopy, the dog. And Lucy is saying to Charlie Brown, have you ever met anybody that was really happy? Very cynically like, and Charlie Brown just how intimidated he is. And then in the next two panels, you see Snoopy in the background turning somersaults, big smile, full of glee and happiness and joy. And in the last panel, Lucy is looking at Charlie Brown, finishing up her sentence, which started with, have you ever known anybody that was really happy and was still in his right mind? And I thought, isn't that great? Isn't that great? Because this speaks to the kind of cynicism that a lot of people have about this idea of happiness. It's almost as if we can't really be happy. What is happiness? Where are you going to find it? We just know that if we can get the right things, meet the right people, hook up with the right person, so forth, then we'll be happy. And many of us that have lived very long know that that's not where happiness is. Happiness is a process. And that's one of the great discoveries that I made a number of years ago. I had a friend of mine who, he's a Methodist minister. As a matter of fact, I've known him for over 50 years now. And he got out of ministerial school the same time I got out of engineering school. We ended up in the same mining community over in Arizona. And I started going to his church. And we continued to get together through the years. And I was visiting him in Los Angeles. Not long ago, quite a while ago, as a matter of fact, a long time ago, and sitting by the swimming pool, and I was kind of, young engineer with a family and all of that, and I was kind of discontent with a lot of stuff, and I was gritching and griping and moaning, and he said, well, Richard, what do you want? And I thought a moment, and I said, I just want to be happy. He said, well, tell me, Richard, what is happiness to you? Well, I was a scholar. I'd been studying the Greek classics and a lot of that, and so I popped up with, Aristotle says that happiness is a lifetime of virtuous activity. Notice that it's a process. And I started spouting some of these other people. He says, shut up. I don't care what the Greeks or anybody else said. I want to know, what do you say happiness is to you? I didn't know. And so what do you do when you can't answer a question? Well, you always throw another question back at them. So I says, well, you tell me, what do you think happiness is? And he says, well, I've thought about this a lot, and happiness is loving and being loved. And I've never forgotten that. And I think he's absolutely right. But again, it's loving. It is a process. It's not arriving at a point where you can say, I am now loved. You are automatically loved infinitely by the universe itself. But the process of self-discovery of who you are within that universe reveals the love that is within you. Sometimes happiness seems to be so subtle, so elusive, that we wonder if it is ever really possible to achieve it. I read a an article in an old issue of Psychology Today, in which the attempt was made through a survey to determine what it was that makes people happy. And 52,000 people filled out this survey and sent it back, the result of which was inconclusive. And I think the reason it was inconclusive, when you think about it, is every one of us has a little bit different idea of what happiness is, or we don't really understand what it's all about. But the one interesting response that they got, and they published this, of course, was a guy who filled out the questionnaire. And at the bottom of the questionnaire, he made a comment. He said, "I think I'm happy. Please read this and verify." Can you imagine? Please read this and verify. And again, that is so typical of so many of us who allow our lives to be controlled by other people's criteria of what is right for us, who we should be, how we should behave, or whatever. You tell me now, by your standards, am I happy? It's kind of silly when we think about it, isn't it? And yet we do that an awful lot. Where is happiness found? I think it's useful perhaps if we define happiness, or at least look at some of the definitions of happiness. And I have some here. I'm not going to cover all of these, there's a bunch of them here. But I like this one from Thomas Jefferson. He says, "It is neither wealth nor splendor, but tranquility and occupation which gives happiness." Isn't that nice? It's not the endpoint of wealth or tranquility. That's not the kind of thing that stays very stable, but it's in the occupation. It's the way you involve yourself in life, the way you're expressing yourself. Process again. And then there's another one here that, well, I already gave you that one, Aristotle. Happiness is a lifetime of virtuous activity. It's process. Once again, you don't ever arrive at it. You are just continually expressing, and it's in the expression where you experience your happiness. George Bernard Shaw said this: "We have no more right to consume happiness without producing it than to consume wealth without producing it." Think about that one. A lot of times we think, I want to be wealthy. Like, this is a place to be. But it's a process. It's a process, a production process, if you will, just like happiness is. Oh, there's several others here, but here's a great one from Dr. Ernest Holmes. While it doesn't speak to process directly, it's implied in there. He says, "Happiness is a state of inner peace, a consciousness of the goodness of God." It is to be aware. And what this is really, to me, referring to is an awakening. It is an awakening process of the inner presence of reality in us, through us, and as us. The awakening to the truth that each of us is made in its, God's, image and likeness. Okay, so let's take a look at this business of happiness. First of all, what is happiness not? There's a couple of things that I've written down here. The first is, it is not the acquisition of things or the pursuit of happiness or the pursuit of pleasure. I remember seeing a bumper sticker a while back that said, 5 secrets of happiness. Money, 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 money. And that is really the way a lot of people feel. I mean, we won't admit that because we know that there's all kinds of bad things about money. I haven't found them yet. But somehow or another we have a tendency to feel, don't we, that'll solve our problems, that'll bring us happiness. By the way, talking about money, the month of January is going to be dedicated to prosperity. I'm calling it Prosperity Month. There are 5 Sundays in January. I'm going to be speaking on the areas of prosperity and wealth and abundance and expansion. And I'm going to be doing a 1-hour class after every service, like I did a while back, a couple of times I did a while back, that's going to be fantastic. And you're invited to that. And we'll talk a little bit about money and some of the crazy ideas that none of you have about it, but some people do have that might have influenced you. Okay, happiness is not money, 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 money. We're not going to find it in something out there. And yet we are conditioned to believe that we can. Madison Avenue and all of its advertising and promotion and so forth is continually trying to tell us what it is we need in order to be able to achieve happiness. Here is a little bit of text that came out of an article that I read in the USA Today some time ago, but I noted it. I wish I'd kept the whole thing so I could hold the page up in front of you and show you this. But this is what it says. Needless to say, you can't buy happiness. But for a mere $299 a month, you can lease exhilaration. Simply visit your authorized BMW dealer and lease a new BMW 325. Isn't that neat? I can't believe that people publish this sort of stuff, but I guess it influences some. And then they went on and it talked about the virtues of this fine automobile, and it's a really fine automobile, and I guess they still do the 325, don't they? It's just many generations since that one. And then it ends up this way. It said, for a program, you'll love this, for a program of spiritual uplift on easy monthly terms, we recommend you visit a participating BMW dealer. Well, okay, there you have it, folks. Where is happiness found? It's at your local BMW dealer. Happiness also is not found in the avoidance of pain. I read a book one time. I still have it. I've read another book or two also. And this book was called The Brilliant Function of Pain. And a lot of people are constantly struggling to get away from the pain. And admittedly, we want to relieve our pains. But a lot of the things that we do don't relieve the pain. It just puts it off or prolongs whatever the process is that we're in order to be able to alleviate the pain. And if we keep running away from whatever the discomfort is in our life, whether it's psychological pain, emotional pain, or physical pain, oftentimes we find that we don't accomplish a whole lot. And the reason that we don't accomplish a whole lot is that we tend to give our attention so much to the avoidance of whatever the disturbance is that we don't have time to be created in the rest of our life. You know, there's a wonderful story about the dean, the former dean, the late dean of academics at Harvard University. Now, he died way back in the 30s, and I read this just recently in a more contemporary book. His name was LeBaron Briggs. And one day, a graduate student came to him who had not completed his thesis on time. And he said to the dean, he says, "Dean, I just didn't have time. I couldn't complete my thesis because I didn't have the time. I wasn't feeling well." And Dean Briggs looked at him and he said, "Son, there's something I want to let you know. It's time for you to realize that most of what gets done in the world has been by people who weren't feeling well." Wow! If some of us could have learned that early on and stopped trying to pass the buck. Again, I'm not talking about anybody here because I know you're all totally accountable and responsible for everything that you've ever done, just like me. Isn't that true? Okay. How often do we go through life trying to avoid some situation or circumstances that it's uncomfortable or a little bit painful for us? And you see, happiness is not found in anything out there. It's not found in the pursuit of pleasure. It's not found in the avoidance of pain. It's not found in the acquisition of things. Where is happiness found? Well, there are three things that I want to give you. Now, you can come up with your own three things or maybe your own dozen things. And everybody might have a little bit different idea. But these are three keys, I think, that can help us in finding happiness in our life. And they are these. Number one, live purposefully. Number two is to appreciate your relationship with others and with life in total. And number three, trust, trust, trust. Trust in God. Trust in the process. Let's look at the first one, purposeful living. Norman Cousins, the the late great editor of the Saturday Review, as well as great in so many other ways, counselor to presidents and whatever. I heard him in a lecture that was given through the Mile High Church of Religious Science in Denver, the largest religious science church we have. They have 12,000 members now. And he spoke around his book. His book was really popular at the time, The Anatomy of an Illness. He got very, very ill, and he was told that it was essentially an irreversible thing. It was terminal, and he couldn't be cured. He might be able to delay it a while. And they're still not sure what the accurate diagnosis was, but he decided he was going to take things in his own hands, and he understood something about the mind-body phenomena. And one of the things that he incorporated into it, and it doesn't have a lot to do with what I'm talking about here, but it's really useful, he found that humor, he came across the idea that humor was a very important factor in being able to bolster the immune system. And so he got hold of lots of old Marx Brothers and the Three Stooges and the Max Sennett and, a lot of these old slapstick sorts of comedy that he just really loved. And he checked into a motel and he just watched hour after hour of this and kept it going, and he laughed so much, and he got well. And he was about 80 when he died back in 1990. So maybe the disease still killed him, but he did something to extend his life and absolutely amazed other people. But he had a friend who was the great cellist, Pablo Casals, and they were buddies. And he was visiting, he tells in this book, Anatomy of an Illness, he tells at the time he was visiting Casals, and he noticed, and Casals was quite old at the time, he was 90 years old, and he noticed that he'd get up in the morning, Casals, and he was an old man. He'd kind of rickety, barely get around. He'd go in and he'd clean up, and finally he'd have a little bit to eat, and he was beginning to loosen up a little bit, and then he'd head off to his studio, where he had his cello and other instruments and piano, and he was very accomplished on the piano. The moment he walked through that door, it was like he stepped into a new world. And something happened to him, and he began to straighten up a little bit. He'd go and sit down in front of that piano and begin to play, and it was as if those old crippled up hands, arthritically crippled up hands of his, seemed to loosen up, and he came alive, and he would play with a sensitivity and a control that could be the envy of many much or highly competent musicians. And it was like, and it played beautifully. And it absolutely amazed Norman Cousins. You see, what was happening here? There's something in him, as there is in every one of us, that is constantly driving, pounding on the doors of our consciousness to be expressed, that is our contribution or is our talent that wants to get out. And that's what we're here for in this life. Ernest Holmes, our founder, says that we exist, or to put it another way, the purpose of life is self-expression. And he's not the only one that's ever said that. I've come across those exact words from other people, all the way from yogis to fundamental Christians, who speak of these kinds of things. We're alive. We're here to give expression to the self. And when we say it, it has very special meaning, because when we're talking about the self, we're talking about the God self in us, through us, and as us. And every one of us is special. And this is what happens with people like Casals when they did that. He's long gone now, of course, but there's something that quickens within us. There's an identification, almost like a vibration, that goes out and resonates with that true expression, and then it comes forth. Roger Ailes, some of you know who Roger Ailes is. He's the head of Fox News now, and he's worked with various presidential in campaigns over the years, and he's an interesting guy. He's come into somewhat disrepute in liberal circles today because he's very, very highly conservative. But at any rate, he's an interesting guy, and he's written some wonderful stuff. And he wrote a book called You Are the Message, which is a wonderful book. And I read this years ago. And he tells about a time when he was a young man just getting started. He went to work and kind of a promotional type, but really he was a flunky working for some radio or television studio. And one of the tasks that he had in this job was to pick up the dignitaries when they arrived to go on to the particular variety show that Roger Ailes was bringing these people to. He didn't have much to do with it at that time, actually, the production of it. And one of the people that he picked up on one occasion was Jack Benny. He picked him up, and he had a hard time finding him because he couldn't find Jack Benny because he had a picture of Jack Benny in his mind. He finally finds this little shriveled up old man, and that was Jack Benny. And he wondered to himself, how in the world am I ever going to get him back? He'll probably die in the limo before we get to the studio. Put him in the car, took him over there, placed him in the room, the waiting room, met whatever his needs were, and said, I'll be back to get you when it's time to go on. And he shows up a little later and he says, Mr. Benny, you have 3 minutes and then you're going to go on. He says, okay. And then he comes back in 3 minutes and escorts him over to the side of the stage. He said when Jack Benny stepped out on the stage to stand before the television audience, it was like he came alive. He straightened up, and I don't know if any of you remember Jack Benny, but he had a particular strut to the way he carried himself. He got out there and he gave one of the best performances he had ever given as far as Roger Ailes was concerned. You see, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And you know that yourself. Because you know yourself. Remember when you were a young girl? Not you guys, but maybe. But at any rate, when you were a young girl, you might have not have been feeling well, and then you got that call from that special guy or that special person, and they asked you for a date, and wow, you came alive. Didn't you? There's something that happens within us when we identify with some deep desire, drive. The deepest and the most driving desires are those that are connected with this need to express that specialness of us. And that's what happened with Jack Benny. Let's take a look at the second one of these factors, these three things, and that is the appreciation of our relationship to others. You see, we are interdependent with each other. We are interrelated. We are interconnected. We're all part of each other's experience. This is a very, very hard thing for some people to experience. But if you begin to examine the way the universe comes together, the way the universe runs, and take some classes on this, because we talk about this oneness principle all the time. You come to realize there is a oneness. There is no distinction between you and me. And we exacerbate the apparent distinction between us when we create a greater and greater sense of our distance. But at the fundamental level of things, we are all one. This is why Jesus could say, whatever you do, whatsoever things ye shall do unto one of the least of these, my brethren, ye shall do, you do unto me. What you do to somebody else is going to affect me. Now, this is not something he's just talking about himself. He's giving us a basic principle here. What you do affects me. What I do affects you. When I'm happy, this is going to affect your happiness. And so on down the line. This is a quantum mechanical principle, by the way. You know, in quantum mechanics, when I took a course in graduate school in quantum mechanics, and one of the things that just blew me away in a book called Quantum Theory by, can't remember his name, very, very well known, very metaphysical. He makes the comment that there is no event that occurs anywhere in the universe that may not influence everything else, may not affect everything else. We are connected, see? And this is what we're being told, and this is what we are. So our relationship, appreciating our relationship with each other, and you may not like somebody else. What do you do about that? When they are you and you are them, like the old Beatles song, I am you and you are me and we are one together, or a verse, something like that. Do you remember that? It's a basic principle. What do you do when you just don't like the scumbag. Okay? Well, you don't necessarily have to like him or her, but to appreciate your relationship within the whole is the important thing. We are made of this, like I was talking to the kids this morning in the little children's segment over here. What was it that God used to create us all? You know, if God is all there is, and in the beginning all there was God, then what are we made of? God. That's all we can be made of. So we're all part of the same thing. It's just that somehow along the line we were created in such a way that I don't understand, but God chose to make us individual and self-conscious about it so that we could make the choices that are going to bring us to the point that we find ourselves in our life. Why not wake up to the truth about who you are? You are all one in God. And you say, but I just don't like that SOB, that sweet old boy that means. I don't like that guy. And how can I be loving around it? Well, acknowledge at any rate that you are in that same field of love with that person. And that love is God. And you are, as our founder, Ernest Holmes says, you are a center of God in God. You are a center of love in love. You got it? Wow. Okay, I may not like the way somebody behaves, but I'm willing to accept that there is an equivalency at the fundamental level, at the level of the absolute. And this is what helps move us through. We don't always like everybody that we encounter. Like a friend of mine, his name is Fred McCowan. He was a minister of religious science. I haven't heard from him in 10 or 12 years. Used to be at Las Vegas, Nevada. And I'd visit him occasionally when I'd go there. And I remember we were talking about this very thing one time, this business of love and loving and all. And he says, you know, Richard, we're told to love everybody. I've struggled with that, but I finally come to the conclusion, I do love everybody. I just don't want to go fishing with them all. Isn't that neat? And we can adopt that. We can acknowledge our relationship in this field of love. At the same time, we recognize that the way some people may be expressing is not necessarily the most useful as you can see it. But just to acknowledge that is to break down some of the barriers of resistance that you might have concerning somebody and open you to the flow of love, the field of which you dwell within. Let's take a look at the last one of these 3 points, trust. And that's really the ability to give yourself over in trust to the process of life. If God is anything, God is process. Okay? To give yourself over to the process of life. To allow yourself to come into alignment with the fundamental basic purposes behind all things. There was a great preacher, lived back in the 1800s, these Christian preachers. Name was Henry Ward Beecher. And he died, I have a note here, 1887. So it was a long time ago. And a lot of people know, as ministerial students especially, learn about these guys. And he said this, and I love it. The strength and happiness of a person consists in finding out the way God is going and then go that way too. Isn't that neat? And I would use very different terminology. My understanding comes from a little different arena entirely, but the idea that there's a natural inclination for God in life as nature to unfold according to its own principles, its own purposes. And I'm part of that process. You are part of that. And when we can come into alignment with that, we are open to whatever inspiration there might be for us. We make ourselves accessible, and it's not like God is going to grant you insight. It's like it just comes forth into your consciousness. This whole process that we talk about visioning is designed around that idea. that when you do this, but take the classes, by the way, and you'll learn about visioning. When you do that process, what you're doing is you're opening yourself to the intuitive side of your own nature, which is a direct line to the universal intuitive, if you want to look at it that way. The degree to which we come into alignment is the degree to which we're going to get more and more of this sense of trust, out of which there will be joy, there will be peace, there will be assurance. And this is what happiness is, because it is the coming, constantly coming into alignment that is the process that leads you to experience life in a way that is a happy experience of your life. So where is happiness to be found? Well, these three things. Live purposefully. Relate to others. Appreciate your relationship to others. And trust. Purpose, appreciation, trust. P-A-T. This is the pat answer to happiness. The what?
You just made that up.
How did you know? Yeah. Purposefully live, appreciate your relationship to others, and trust. And you won't have to depend on a new BMW 325 in order to have achieved happiness. Let's have a short prayer, shall we? Let's take a deep breath and let it out slowly. Relax into the moment. Know that there is a peace and a power within which we live and move and have our being. I am one with all that God is. Say that to yourself silently. I am one with all that God is. There is one life. That life is God. That life is my life right now. There is one mind. That mind is God. That mind is my mind right now. There is one creativity and intelligence, and that is a creativity and intelligence of God, the infinite presence within which I live, move, and have my being. Therefore, that creativity and intelligence is my creativity and intelligence right now. And in the realization of that, I know I'm one with all that is good. All of these attributes beyond what have already been spoken are that with which I am one. And I know that in the realization of this truth, there is healing. So I let go of anything that may obscure my ability to experience fully the nature of my being. I let it go. I just don't even pay attention to it. And I look beyond to the God presence, which is all good, within which I have the totality of my life, and I am healed. I am healed of any psychological, any emotional, or any physical imbalance right now in this moment. I know this is so. I am filled full of gratitude that this is so, and I accept it as so. And together we can declare, and so it is.